Please bow to Venerable You Lu. Good evening, 师父。
Okay, good evening everyone, and I'm very happy to be back here in Singapore again after a year. And I think for today's talk, I think you have been reading the book called For All Living Beings, written by Venerable Master. And for the past few months, I believe you have already touched on some of the topics, beginning from precepts to meditation, and then we'll then move on to wisdom. And so today, we're going to touch on the 4 bases of mindfulness. And in the book, it's actually just a page. So I've been thinking about what I should talk for 1.5 hours. So it has been a challenge, but I'll do my best and try to cover as much as I know, okay? And if there is any questions that you'd like to ask for the next 1.5 hours, please feel free to do so. Okay, please allow me to sit down as I talk. Okay. Okay, so in the book, it's called the 4 bases of mindfulness. But there are also many different terms that refer to the same thing. So in many texts, you would find it more commonly known as the 4 foundations of mindfulness, and or the 4 establishments of mindfulness, or the 4 domains of mindfulness, and even the 4 ways of establishing mindfulness. Okay, so these are some of the common terms that has been used to describe the 4 bases of mindfulness. Okay. Okay, so first of all, what is mindfulness? What do you think is mindfulness? Any answers? Okay. Right. So in the West, mindfulness, the topic of mindfulness is actually gaining a lot of attention, and it's becoming increasingly popular. And people are practicing mindfulness because it is a way of getting our attention to be in the present moment. Okay, so mindfulness is about, coming back to the present moment, to where you are, and without any kind of mental judgment. Okay, so if you're walking, you're just walking. If you're eating, you're just eating. If you are taking a shower, you're just taking a shower. So mindfulness practice is about observing what goes on in our mind as we carry out that action. So for example, when we are walking, we are simply walking and with full attention to our experience of walking. Okay? And mindfulness can be cultivated through a formal practice. So you can have a formal sitting meditation session whereby you settle down the mind and you try to bring up the attention. And then mindfulness can carry on with that quality of attention and bring that into our daily activities. Okay? And so we can bring about mindful attention to all kinds of our activities. So when you are washing your dishes, for example, or when you are putting on your clothes, you can practice mindfulness. And the reason why it's so emphasized in the West is also because the benefits of mindfulness. It brings about more empathy, more compassion. It improves immune system. Okay, it helps to reduce stress. It helps one to focus on their work. And with that, it helps us to improve our health and our medical conditions. And people who have medical problems also use that mindfulness practice to help them with their medical problems. So mindfulness has been increasingly important because the world is getting faster and faster, right, with advanced technology. And we are getting more and more information every day with the internet, with all kinds of social media. So every day we are digesting more and more information. And with that, we get more and more stress. And so people turn to practicing mindfulness as a way to overcome that. Okay? So in the West, like in America, for example, this is something that I found from the internet. In America, people start to practice mindfulness from as early as 1979. Okay, so we are 2018 now. So that's about 40 years. Okay, mindfulness has been practiced for the past 40 years. And there has been 477 mindfulness studies in 2012. Okay, so that shows how many people are researching on mindfulness. And there are 20,000 meditators. People have spent $4 billion American dollars on mindfulness-based alternative medicine in 2007. Okay, 6.3 million people use mind-body therapies after referral by a mainstream medical doctor. And 18,000 school children has been practicing mindfulness in school, especially in America and in UK, in some of the schools. The teachers have guided students before they start the class each day. They get their students to do mindfulness practice for a few minutes before they start the class. Okay, so it's becoming a part of their curriculum in the school, right? I don't know about Singapore. Is there any schools in Singapore that practice mindfulness practice? Have you heard of any schools that does mindfulness practice in schools? No? Okay, maybe after this talk you can propose to the school that your children go to. And in America, out of 50 states, 42 states have received mindfulness-based training. Okay, so 42 states out of 50 are practicing mindfulness. And then 12,000, sorry. School-based, I think general public schools as well. Yes. And then 12,000 healthcare professionals worldwide. So if you look at Amazon and you search on mindfulness, you can see a lot of books written by both Buddhists and non-Buddhists, and also a lot of people who are in the medical profession, doctors, who are using mindfulness as a technique to help their patients to overcome diseases. And so, and then we have about 80 business corporates are also using mindfulness in their workplace. Okay, so you can see that the practice of mindfulness is a very ancient art. It comes from the Buddha 2,600 years ago. And it starts to get a lot of attention for the past 40 years in the West. Okay. Right, so what is mindfulness? In the Buddhist tradition, mindfulness is actually one of the elements in the Eightfold Path. Okay, so it is emphasized in the Buddhist training, and it is one of the most basic aspects of in the three traditions, in the Pali tradition, in the Mahayana tradition, and in the Tibetan tradition. So it's something that all the different Buddhist traditions have in common. And it's one of the most basic teachings of Buddhism. And in the West, people are practicing mindfulness for several reasons, right? Because of increased pressure. So people want to reduce stress, so they do mindfulness practice. or they have medical problems, so they do mindfulness practice to help them to overcome certain medical problems. Okay, but in Buddhism, I think the Buddha has a bigger goal, and mindfulness practice is taught as a way to help us to gain insight and to lead us to liberation. Okay, so in what differs from what people think of mindfulness as a practice and what people think of mindfulness in Buddhism is that the goal is slightly different. Okay, I think Buddhism has a much larger goal, that we want to be liberated. Okay. And in Buddhist practice, mindfulness can come in different forms of art, right? You can practice mindfulness in the form of tea meditation. Okay, so doing every step of making tea with full attention. Okay, so that is mindfulness practice in tea ceremony. And you can also practice mindfulness in sutra calligraphy. And in Japan, there are also different art forms. You can find mindfulness practice in flower arrangements. Okay, and in archery is actually a kind of mindfulness practice. And also in Buddhist painting. Okay, so in the West, people might think that mindfulness starts. You can only do mindfulness when you're sitting in meditation, but mindfulness is actually practiced in. You can actually do the practice in every aspect of your daily activity, and you can also do that, as a form of art. Okay. And in the Compendium of Knowledge, it says, what is mindfulness? It is non-forgetting by the mind with regard to the object experience. So its function is non-distraction. Okay, so the essential thing to mindfulness is that we do not get distracted. And mindfulness has the quality of remembering what you are mindful about. Okay, so you might start off doing walking meditation, or being mindful of every step that you make, and then suddenly you start to recall what happened in the past. You start to have memories, and then or you start to plan what I'm going to have for lunch later on. Okay, these are distractive thoughts, and mindfulness practice is to be aware of these thoughts that's coming to your mind, and to observe these thoughts, but without reacting to these thoughts. Okay. Okay, so why did the Buddha talk about the 4 bases of mindfulness? In the Mahaprajna Paramita Sastra, it says that there are beings who, as a result of worries, distractions, and misunderstanding, cling to the body, feelings, the mind, and things, and lead a bad life. And for these people, the Buddhas preach the 4 foundations of mindfulness. Okay, so what it says here is that without a good understanding of what is the self. So normally we would regard our self or our identity based on the body, right? Based on the physical form that we have. Or we might base our identity on our feelings, what we experience, okay? Or we might base our identity on what we think, what we perceive, or our opinions. And also we might base our identity with the qualities that we have. For example, I'm compassionate, or I'm giving, or I'm stingy, or I'm unforgivable. Okay, so we tend to have these kind of identities, and that's how we cling to these 4 things, which are the body, feelings, mind, and phenomena. Things here in the passage actually refer to phenomena and mental qualities. Okay. The 4 bases of mindfulness is actually one of the 7 sets of states that's conducive to enlightenment. And and it's identified in many schools of Buddhism as means of progressing towards awakening. The seven sets of states conducive to enlightenment, you can see from the chart on the right-hand side, we have the 37 Dharma of enlightenment. In Chinese, we say 37道品, right? So we have 4 Satipatthana, that's 4 bases of mindfulness. Sati means mindfulness, Patthana means foundation or base. Okay, so 4 Satipatthana, or the 4 bases of mindfulness. 4 efforts, the 4 bases of magical power, the 5 faculties, the 5 powers, the 7 factors of enlightenment, and the Eightfold Noble Path. And if you count them up, they sum up to 37. So it's called the 37 Dharma of enlightenment, or 37 practices that we can do to help us gain enlightenment. Okay. And if you have been to the Buddha Museum, how many of you have been to the Buddha Museum? Okay, quite a number. Do you see this when you go to the museum? Did you come across these steps? Did you count them? No? Okay. They actually represent the 37 Dharma of enlightenment. If you count them, the next time you go, they add up to 37. Okay? And they actually represent, they symbolize the 37 Dharma of enlightenment. Okay, and then in the Pali Canon, so the framework for systematically cultivating mindfulness, mindful awareness, can be found in the Satipatthana Sutta. Okay, in Chinese it's called 大念处经. Okay, and Maha means great, right? Sati means mindfulness. Patthana means foundation. Okay, so it's the great discourse on the foundation of mindfulness. And this sutta, you can find it in, DN here stands for Digha Nikaya. In Chinese it's Changbu. Okay, that means the long discourse in the Pali Canon. Okay. This is a longer sutra, and there is also the Satipatthana Sutta in the middle discourse, and it's much shorter, and it's a more popular text in the southern tradition. Okay, and there is also another text. It's called the Satipatthana Samyutta. It's in chapter 47 of the Samyutta Nikaya. And in this particular chapter, there are 104 of these very short sutras. And it's a collection of, short stories which talk about the 4 bases of mindfulness. Okay, so two of the more popular stories is the acrobat and the beauty queen. Have you heard of it? The acrobat and the beauty queen? No. Okay, the story of the acrobat goes like this. So one day there is this acrobat who goes into town, and he brings his disciple with him. And he tells his disciple that we are going to do a acrobatic performance for the public. And he tells his disciple, I will take care of you, and you will take care of me. Okay, and then we will do the performance together. And then we will be successful, and then we will come down and collect money. Okay, because they are doing acrobatic show on a pole. And then the student told the teacher, says, no, teacher, you are wrong. I should take care of myself, and you should take care of yourself. And then in that way, we will finish the performance, and then we'll come down from the pole, and then we'll collect money. And then the teacher says, you're right. Well, it should be, I will take care of myself, and I'll take care of you. You will take care of yourself, and you will take care of me. And then we will finish the performance together, and then we'll come down and collect money. And the Buddha actually gave this metaphor as a way of how we should practice the 4 foundations of mindfulness. So as we are doing this mindfulness practice, we are mindful of ourselves, and we are also mindful of the people or the things that surround us. Okay? So we have this, what we call the internal contemplation and the external contemplation. Okay? So this is a metaphor that was given by the Buddha. And then the other one is called the Beauty Queen. The Beauty Queen is a more popular story, and you probably have heard of it. It's about a person who has a bowl of oil on top of his head. And he's trying to walk across a crowd. And behind him is a man holding a knife, pointing at him. And he has to walk across the crowd without a single drop of oil falling out from the bowl. And the bowl is filled with oil up to the brim. Okay? And if a single drop of oil spills out from the bowl, then the person behind him will kill him. And so this person is walking through the crowd. And among the crowd, there is this beautiful queen who is dancing and performing for the crowd. So what do you think? Can this person who's walking through the crowd, can he take a glance at this beautiful queen? Why? Because he might get distracted, right? And then the oil might spill out from the bowl, okay? So that's how we should practice the 4 foundations of mindfulness. Okay, we should put our full attention on the object that we are placing our attention on. Okay, so this is the metaphor that was given by the Buddha. And there are many short stories like this in the Satipatthana Sutta, this chapter 47. So if you're interested, you can go online. It's available online. They're all translated. And you can go and look up these stories. They're pretty interesting. Okay. Okay, apart from the Pali Canon, we can also find similar texts in the Chinese Mahayana Canon. And 2 of these sutras that are in the Chinese Canon, one is the Madhyama Agama, or in Chinese we call Zhong A Han. Okay, and then also in the Ekottara Agama, or Zheng Yi O Han. And does anybody use the Fo Guang Da Zhang Jing? Do you know we have a digital version of the Fo Guang Da Zhang Jing? And it's available online, free of charge. No need to pay. Okay, if you like to read up the text, you can go to the Fo Guang Shan website, and then you can click on Fo Guang Da Zhang Jing. There are many icons where you can click into. You can click into Fo Guang Da Zhang Jing, and then you can search for the text under O Han Zhang. Okay. So far, Fo Guang Shan has published 7 different canons. The goal of the editorial committee is to publish 16 different canons. So far, the committee has published 7. And one of the canons is called the Agama canon, so O Han Zhan. And so you can actually click it. You can actually look up the text online. And I would advise you to read up, to use O Han Zhang, because they have been edited for modern readers. Okay, so if you look up the Taisho Tripitaka, which most people use, that is the Da Zhen Zhang, that's compiled by the Japanese, which is also available online on C-Beta. And if you read that, it's not wrong, but the punctuation there are many mistakes with the punctuation. And so what the Fo Guang Shan committee has done is they have corrected all these punctuations and make it readable for modern readers. Okay, so I'm also doing a little bit of advertisement for the editorial team, because they really spent a lot of years doing that. Okay, I think we should promote that. Okay, And then other sutras that also, talk about the four foundations of mindfulness, you can find in certain commentaries, such as the Abhidhamma Kosha. Okay, the Abhidhamma Kosha is in the, what we say, the Sen Wen Zhang, the hearers, the canon of the hearers. And then the Yogacara Bhumi Sastra, in Chinese it's called Yu Qie Si Di Lun. This is in the mind-only school. It's a text from the mind-only school, Yogacara school. And then we have the Visuddhimagga, or in Chinese, Qingjing Dao Lun. This is from the Pali tradition. Okay? And you can see that some of these, important texts of Buddhism actually have discussed the four foundations of mindfulness, which means the four foundations of mindfulness has an important place in Buddhist studies. Okay? Okay, and one of the most popular texts that people are referring to when they talk about the four foundations of mindfulness is the Satipatthana Sutta. And it is one of the most widely commented texts in the Pali canon, and it continues to have a very important place in the Vipassana movement. And in the text was preached by the Buddha to a group of disciples in the country of the Kurus. And in the teaching, the Buddha explained the practice called the four foundations of mindfulness. And in the Satipatthana Sutta, there is a repetition. There is a phrase that keeps on repeating. Okay, and it keeps on repeating 13 times throughout the text. Okay, following each of the specific meditation instructions that pertains to the four foundations. Okay, so the four foundations comprise of the contemplation of the body, contemplation of sensations, of feelings, contemplation of the mind, and contemplation of phenomena or mental qualities. So these are the four things that we tend to regard as the self. And these are the four things that the Buddha taught on how we can put our attention on. Okay, so why do we practice? This is actually from the book For All Living Beings. And Venerable Master says that the four bases of mindfulness allow us to use our mindfulness so that we do not mistake impurity for purity, suffering for happiness, impermanence for permanence, and what has no independent self for something that does. Okay. Okay, first we talk about the mindfulness of the body. So in the Satipatthana Sutta, the mindfulness of the body involves 14 different exercises. So the first exercise that was given by the Buddha in the sutra is mindfulness of the inhalation and exhalation of the breath. So for some of you who have been to meditation classes, you are probably familiar with this. It is a basic way of calming the mind through breath meditation. Okay, so what you do is you put your attention on your in-breath. So as you're breathing in, you know that you are breathing in. And when you're breathing out, you know that you are breathing out. And you observe the length of your breath and the quality of your breath. So for example, is your breath humid or dry? Is your breath warm or cold? Is it a long breath or a short breath? Okay, but without controlling the breath. So this is a basic meditation practice. And it is very useful because the breath is always with us. But what we don't realize is that we are breathing. most of the time, right? Throughout the day, we don't usually realize that we are actually breathing. Okay? So that's mindfulness of the breath. And then the second mindfulness practice is mindfulness of the 4 physical postures. So the 4 physical postures refer to walking, standing, sitting, and lying down. So these are the 4 postures that we would usually take throughout the day, right? So this is also something that we can do every day. Because throughout the day, we are either walking, or we are standing, or we are sitting, or we are lying down, okay? So these are the 4 basic postures that we will have throughout the day. And from these 4 physical postures, then we can extend our awareness to all physical activities. Okay, so for example, when I'm riding to work, when I'm wearing a makeup, when I'm washing my clothes, when I am talking to my teacher, or when I am waiting for the bus. Mindfulness practice can come as something, you can integrate that into the activity that you are doing every day. Okay? So this is actually very humanistic because it is something very simple and we can use it every day. Okay? So for the first 3 I would say these first three groups of these 14 exercises, they help us to get our attention to the present moment. Okay, they help us to bring awareness into what we are doing. Okay, and then for the next 3 groups of these 14 exercises, they sort of lead us to understanding the nature of the body. Okay, so the 4th group in this list, mindfulness of the various components of the body, and it is an intentionally revolting list that includes fingernails, bowel, spittle, and urine. And this, well, the list goes on. You can think of the different parts of the body, the different things that make up the body. So, and these things, when you, usually we will think the body is clean, right? But, for example, if I have a bowl of noodles and somebody spit into my bowl of noodles, what do you think? Would you want to eat it? No, right? So, what does that say about the nature of the body? It's not really clean, right? It's not really clean. Okay? And so that is one example, and you can think of the different parts. For example, okay, let's go on to the next one first. Mindfulness of the body as composed of the 4 great elements. The 4 great elements here refer to, in Chinese we say 地水火风. Okay, so that's earth, water, fire, and wind. Okay, so for example, the temperature of your body, that is the fire element. The urine, the tears, the sweat, the blood, that's the water element, right? And then your breath, your gas, your stomach gas, that's the wind element. And then all the different cause components of the body, that's the earth element. And so our body is basically made up of these 4 elements. And usually when we are healthy, it's because these 4 elements are in balance. When these 4 elements go out of balance, then we become sick, right? It's the same as what we can observe from the world. For example, I know recently there is a heavy flood in Japan. And that's because that's excessive water, right? And these four elements have gone out of balance. And so there's excessive flooding in Japan. So that happens to us, our body, when the four elements are not in balance, then we get sick. Okay. And then the last group of contemplation is contemplation on the impure. And that is contemplation of a corpse in 9 successive stages of decomposition. So in this contemplation, you are observing how the body, a dead body, decays over time. And having observed the nature of how the body decays, then you reflect on how our body will, the state of the body, the state of what the state of our body will be after we passed away. Okay, and so when we come to realize that, then we come to realize that this body is not the form that we will want to be in. All right. Okay, this is from the Mahaprajnaparamita Sastra, and it says that when one sits down, one feels happiness, but when this position persists, it gives rise to suffering. Okay, so for example, you have been walking the whole day, and when you get home, what you want to do is you want to sit down, right? And sitting down gives you a pleasant feeling, right? Because your legs are tired, and you want to be relieved of that tiredness. But if you continue to sit for a long time, what happens to this pleasant feeling? Does it stay the same? Does the pleasant feeling stay the same? No, right? You might get tired of sitting, and then you want to stand up again. Okay? So we have this feeling that we tend to think of as pleasant. But if you continue to stay in this position, then this pleasant feeling turns into an unpleasant feeling. So what does that tell us? Is that feeling really pleasant? Is not really pleasant, right? We have the impression that the feeling is pleasant. But if it's really pleasant, then it should stay pleasant all the time. But it changes, and it turns into an unpleasant feeling. And this unpleasant feeling is actually there in whatever posture we start off with. It is just that it's not that apparent. And as we persist in that position, then it becomes apparent. Okay? And then at the beginning, walking, standing, and lying down are happiness. That means happiness in the sense that it gives us a satisfactory feeling. Okay, it gives us a happy feeling. But in the end, they too are suffering. Okay? In the end, these feelings turn into, dukkha. So whether one is bending or one is stretching, whether one is bowing the head or raising it, whether one looks straight ahead or to the side, whether one is breathing out or breathing in, suffering always follows the body. So from conception and birth to death, there is not a single moment of happiness. All right? Okay, so what it says is that we always try to find pleasure. We always try to find some sort of relief from this satisfactory feeling or sensation that we experience, right? But they don't give us any lasting happiness. They don't give us any lasting joy. And they always turn into something that we don't want. Okay, and I think you would have experienced that in your life. But sometimes when we are not mindful, then this reflection does not come to us. Okay, so the practice of mindfulness is to watch the sensation that's going on in the body and how it changes. Okay, and then next we can think about the nature of the body. Okay, so for example, you can think if we leave this body to be as it is, okay, not brushing our teeth, not taking a shower, not cutting our nails, not going for a haircut, then what happens to this body? What happens to this body if we don't do anything? It's going to stink, right? It's going to smell bad, right? Okay, and so that's the nature of our body, right? So we can think about how much time we actually take to groom the body. A lot of time. From the start of the day, right, we have to brush our teeth. And then we have to wash our face. And then we have to comb our hair. I don't have to. And then we might have to take a shower, right? And then you need to put on your lipstick, right? Because you need to go for work. You need to do facial. You need to go for manicure. Sometimes you need to go for a massage. And then you need to cut your fingernails, right? Once in a while. You need to go for a haircut once in a while. And then sometimes you dye your hair. You have different kinds of haircuts. So you can think about the time that we actually take to just groom the body. It's actually quite a lot of time, isn't it? Oh, not just time, but also money. We also spend a lot of money doing that. Okay. So, but if we just leave the body as it is, have you seen people who don't cut their nails? Have you seen people who just leave their nails? I think I've seen somebody who never cuts his hair and who never cuts his fingernails. And you know, when you look at people who just leave the nails growing for a few years, what do you think of that? It's very disgusting, isn't it? Even though you are not undergoing that experience, and even though somebody is undergoing that experience, looking at that disgusts you. Okay? So what does that say about the nature of the body? Is that it deteriorates by nature. Okay, the nature of the body is impure. Okay? And then the next thing is that the body is subjected to hunger and thirst. That means we need to constantly feed the body, right? And you can think about how much time you spend, how much money you spend feeding the body. Sometimes we spend the whole morning thinking about what we want to eat for lunch, right? Sometimes we spend 1 hour just queuing up for a restaurant. Maybe we spend a few hours thinking about the menu, deciding on the menu, what we want to have for the party. So that's, how much time we actually spend, how much money and how much energy that we actually spend on just looking after the body. Okay? Just these two things alone, you can reflect on that. And you can come to the conclusion that is this body really worth spending so much time and money on? You can think about it.
That's why the guy cuts hair. Let's not spend any time with anybody else.
Okay. Oh, you mean because he has come to realize that the nature of the body is impure, and so he decides not to cut his hair? Well, not really. Not really. I'm not saying that you shouldn't eat, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't take shower. Okay, you need to do what the body needs for you to continue. For the body to continue, you still need to feed the body. That's the nature of the body. But do we really need to spend time, like excessive time, just to feed the body? That's what we need to reflect on. But please take shower tonight. And brush your teeth before you go to bed. Okay. And then the next thing is that we are born to sickness, aging, and death. Okay? So like I said, we can get sick when we get viruses, or when the 4 elements are out of balance, we get sick. And usually we think that, we are born, then we grow up, and then we get old, right? But actually, from the time when we are born, we are already aging. Okay, aging starts from the time when we are born. But because you don't see white hair on 5-year-olds, so we tend to think that, okay, we grow up, and then we get old. Okay, but the fact is that, don't look at people's hair now. But the fact is that we start to age from the moment that we are born, right? And then also we are bound to death. We can die anytime, anywhere. So for people who are in an accident, they might go to work as usual, and then they might run into an accident, and then they die. Okay, so life is very fragile, right? The body is very fragile. It is subjected to all this different suffering. And it can happen anytime, anywhere. Okay, so usually we think that we have control over the body. But do we really have control over the body? If we have control over the body, then we wouldn't want this body to get sick, right? We wouldn't want this body to get old. And we wouldn't want this body to die. We want it to live forever, right? So we only have partial control over the body, okay? And the body is very sensitive to external conditions. So when it's too hot or when it's too cold, the body is not able to take it. When you go hungry, you suffer from hunger. Or when you overeat, overeating can be also a kind of suffering, right? When you go do a buffet, for example, all you can eat. And in order to make it worth the money, you eat as much as you can, and then you suffer in the end. Okay? So it's very sensitive to these external conditions, and it has to be just right. Right? And then the next thing that we can reflect on is that we are actually born from impure conditions. Okay, so the human being is born from, the coming of the egg and the sperm. And in many Buddhist texts, it's described as an impure condition, this human body. It's not like in the Western Pure Land, when you are born from a lotus. Okay, that's a pure cause of rebirth. Okay, but in this Saha world, we this human being, this existence actually comes from impure conditions. Okay, right. Okay, this is what Venerable Master says. Let's read this together. One is mindful of the body and contemplates the impure aspects of the body. At the same time, one contemplates the compounded nature of the body, its impermanence, suffering, emptiness, and lack of selfhood. In this way, one counteracts the delusion of seeing the impure as pure. Okay. So when we contemplate on the impure aspects of the body, then we come to see that the body is actually impermanent, right? It's based on suffering. And so we can counteract the delusion of seeing the body as impure. Okay? Right, so what we can conclude from this mindfulness practice is that this body is not worth, putting so much energy and time on. Okay, but I'm not saying that, you should starve yourself, you should go for ascetic practice, but you should treat it as a vessel for your spiritual practice. You should treat it as a vessel for, moving to a higher spiritual state. Okay, that's how you can make your body, worthy, right? Okay, next we go on to mindfulness of feelings. Throughout our life, we have three basic forms of experience, right? Either our feelings are unpleasant, or it's a pleasant feeling, or it's a neutral feeling. It's neither unpleasant nor pleasant feeling. And this unpleasant feeling comes from, these three kinds of feelings correspond to the three kinds of suffering. Okay? The three kinds of suffering is suffering of suffering. Suffering of suffering means just suffering that you experience. So for example, when the weather is too hot, that's suffering of suffering. Or when you're sick, that's suffering of suffering. When you feel just basically unwell, that's suffering of suffering. Okay, when you experience discomfort. When you had a fall and you wound your leg, that's suffering of suffering. Okay? And then when we have this kind of suffering, we try to push it away, right? We try to avoid this kind of experience. So that is aversion. That corresponds to one of the three poisons, which we call aversion, because we try to push it away, we try to avoid it. Okay? And that corresponds to aversion. And then pleasant feeling, like what I said earlier, when you have been sitting for a long time. So what do you want to do? You want to stand up, right? So when you stand up, you have a pleasant feeling. But does this pleasant feeling stay pleasant? No, we have come to the conclusion, no, right? So it's actually a suffering of change. That means this suffering may not be apparent initially, but it comes as it changes, as the conditions changes. Okay? So the pleasant feeling is actually an illusion. Well, I can say that it's sort of an illusion. Because if it's really pleasant, then it should stay pleasant all the time. Okay? So for example, if you like Coca-Cola, for example, if you drink Coca-Cola, and the first cup of Coca-Cola tastes delicious, it's really nice, and that's a pleasant feeling, right? But if you continue to drink maybe 10 cans of Coca-Cola, then what do you feel? I just don't want any more Coca-Cola. No more Coca-Cola for the rest of my life. You might have that kind of impression, right? So that pleasant feeling actually changes. So it's called suffering of change. And the reason why we undergo suffering is because we have attachment to that pleasant feeling when it occurs. Okay? So this suffering comes from attachment. All right? And the last one is neither pleasant nor unpleasant feeling. It's just a neutral feeling. And this neutral feeling actually corresponds to all pervasive suffering. Okay? Which means suffering can take place anytime, anywhere. Okay? So, for example, you go to your workplace and then your boss starts to criticize you, for example. That's an unpleasant feeling, right? But when you go to the workplace, it's neutral. It's just a neutral feeling. And then you start to have unpleasant feeling. And it can come anytime, anywhere, right? So it's all pervasive because this is conditional, okay? And when we are not aware of this all-pervasive suffering, then we tend to suffer from it, right? So when you suddenly got sickness, for example, when you suddenly got sick, then when we are not aware that it's due to causes and conditions, then we suffer from it. Okay? So this suffering actually comes from ignorance. Okay? So we can see these three kinds of feelings correspond to the three kinds of suffering. And these three kinds of suffering come from the three poisons. Okay, the poisons of attachment, aversion, and ignorance. Okay. So this is also something that you can meditate on after this talk, is that you can look at and observe the feelings that you experience throughout the day. And you can also observe the pleasure you try to seek. Okay? So, for example, physically we might be seeking for some kind of pleasure and some kind of relief from suffering. And you can observe how this pleasure or how this pleasant feeling actually changes over the course of a day. Okay? And mentally we might be seeking for approval, right? Or we might be seeking for praise and compliment. And you can observe in the mind how this experience of having a compliment actually changes with time. Okay. Right. This is from the Mahaprajnaparamita Sastra. And it says here the yogin. A yogin here means somebody who contemplates. Okay, it's not somebody who hides in a cave. Okay, it's just somebody who contemplates and does this mindfulness practice. The yogin considers pleasant worldly feeling as suffering. He considers unpleasant feeling as an arrow. And for the neither unpleasant nor pleasant feeling, he considers its impermanent and perishable nature. Thus, he does not experience desire for pleasant feeling. So when he undergoes a pleasant feeling, he does not have attachment for it. And he does not experience hatred for unpleasant feeling. So when you experience an unpleasant feeling, you don't try to push it away. And he does not experience delusion for neither unpleasant nor pleasant feeling. And this is what is called mindfulness of feeling. Okay? So when we are aware of this pleasant and unpleasant feeling, and throughout the course of a day, then we tend to have less complaints, right? When we experience an unpleasant feeling, then we know that, it's because of causes and conditions. It's because this is conditioned experience, and then we will tend to have less complaint about what we experience. Okay, so this is what Rebel Master says in the book. Let's read this together. One is mindful of feelings and observe how pursuing happiness can have the opposite effect of producing the causes for suffering. One also contemplates feelings characteristics of suffering and emptiness. In this way, one counteracts the delusion of seeing suffering as happiness. Okay, so when we are able to be mindful of our feelings, so any pleasant feeling that comes, that we experience, we are able to reflect on that pleasant feeling, and we know that it actually turns into an unpleasant feeling, and we are able to observe that. Okay, so what we can conclude from this mindfulness of feelings is that all kinds of pleasure are subjected to suffering. Right? Okay, the next one is mindfulness of the mind. And the mind is what we will regard as the I, the actual self. Okay? So, because what is experiencing pleasure is actually the self. It's actually the mind, right? That is experiencing the pleasant feeling. Okay, so we have this sense of I, and the sense of I usually, and it is also related to the identity that we have. Okay, so for example, we play different roles throughout the day. Maybe you are a mother, or you are a father, or you are a child, or you are the boss, or you are a director. We play different roles, and sometimes we tend to, be very attached to our identity. Okay, and that is how we regard the self, right? With our identity, and the mind the mind also consists of feelings, perception, volitional action, and consciousness. Okay, so these are the 4 things that make up the mind, right? And with the form, of course, with the physical form, they form the 5 aggregates, the 5 skandhas. Okay, so the mind has this habit of trying to control. Okay, trying to control through our perceptions, right? So throughout the day, we are actually making a lot of decisions. Okay, and you can do an exercise of observing your mind. Does your decision always stay the same? Do you always make the same decisions? Or does it change with different conditions or different circumstances that you come into contact with? Okay, so then if your decision is always changing, then you can actually come to sort of conclude that your mind is also always changing, right? You don't always have the same decision. You don't always make up your mind, right? Okay, and then, so that's the same with perception. The way we perceive things, our opinions about certain things, it is also changing, right? The way we perceive things when we are young, when we are a child, and the way we perceive things now as adults are very different, right? When we see Barbie doll, we don't have the same kind of excitement as when we are a child, right? You don't agree? Okay. I remember when I was in primary school, we used to rush home to watch Transformers. But, well, I don't have that same kind of excitement when I watch Transformers now. But so you can see throughout the course of your life, your perceptions are also changing at the same time. Okay? Another way is you can observe your boss. Does your boss always tell you the same thing? That's for you to observe. Okay. And then you can also observe the level of your consciousness. So in the day, usually we are awake, right? And then when the body is tired, we rest. And then we get asleep, okay? And then we are dreaming, right? So the consciousness of our mind is not the same, okay? And then another thing is that the mind likes to do is it likes to tell stories. It likes to tell different kinds of stories. And sometimes the mind likes to make up stories, right? So you can watch, as an exercise, you can watch what kind of story your mind is telling you, okay? And if you watch your mind, you will notice that you are always talking to yourself. We're always talking to ourselves, right? We're always having mental commentaries, always chattering, always gossiping about certain things. Okay, so the minds have, so from these different things, these different aspects of the mind, you can see that the mind is actually it keeps changing all the time. Okay, but we tend to think that the mind is permanent. We tend to think that this is I. We tend to identify this mind as the I. Okay. Okay, let's read this together. One is mindful of the mind and contemplates the impermanence of the mind as the seeker by contemplating the arising and ceasing of thoughts. In this way, one counteracts the delusion of seeing impermanence as permanence. Okay, so when we look at the mind, we see that the thoughts are actually arising and ceasing, right? The thoughts that we have throughout the day, we keep having different kinds of thoughts. Sometimes we have memories. Sometimes we have plans for the future. Sometimes we discuss politics. Sometimes we discuss, what happened in the school. Or sometimes we have comments on what the news is about. So these thoughts come to us, they come in and they go out. Okay, so through this contemplation, you can come to see that the mind is actually impermanent. Okay, it's changing it's fleeting. It has a nature of fleeting. Okay, so what we can conclude from this is that our minds are constantly changing. Okay. Okay, the last mindfulness practice is the mindfulness of phenomena. And phenomena generally refer to all other things other than the body, feelings, and the mind. Okay, phenomena that comes into our mind and that we grasp on and we are attached to. Okay, so what we do with this mindfulness practice is to realize that phenomena are selfless. Okay, they do not have an independent self. Okay, so what we can think of is taking the river as an example. When we look at the river has flowing water. It has sediments, right? It has, maybe different things that is in the water, maybe some sea animals or anything. Does the water stay the same all the time? Does the river stay the same all the time? No, right? It keeps flowing, like the Singapore River. It keeps flowing, right? But we have to give it a name. We have to call it something river for conventional purposes. Like we need to refer it to something. So we give it a name. We call it Singapore River. Okay? But is it the same all the time? No, it's not the same. Okay. Now, we can also think of the example of the school, or the school that you go to. Is it the same school? It's not the same school, right? It might have the same name, but it's not the same school that you go to. Can I say that? Because the teachers are different. The students are different. The principal might be different now. The courses that is conducted are different. But it has the same name, but it's a different school. Okay? So now with that, we can look at the self. Are you the same self? When I call you 20 years before and when I call you now, are you the same person? Yes or no? No, right? We are not the same person. The person is what we call a person is made up of two things, the body and the mind, right? The body is changing all the time. We are growing up. We are aging. So it's different all the time. The mind, like what we conclude earlier, it keeps changing, right? Our perceptions, our opinions, our decision keeps changing. So it's not the same. But we always have this strong sense of I, right? And we always have this strong sense of a self, which is actually an illusion. It's not really the self, but we tend to regard this person as a self. So, for example, when I ask you to think of your mother, what comes to your mind? The physical form of your mother, or the characteristics of your mother. So we tend to think of this person as having an independent, sort of being independent, right? But is it independent? Is this person really independent? Okay, this is getting too serious. Okay, let's move on. Okay, considering things in this way, this is from the Mahaprajnaparamita Sastra. So, considering things in this way, he is not attached to objects of the mind and was submitting to the characteristics of dharmas. He does not think about the body, or about feeling, or about the mind, or about dharmas. And he knows that these four things are without a basis. Okay? So usually we have this identity of a self. We tend to identify with our physical form. Right? We tend to identify with our feelings, what we feel throughout the day. We tend to identify with what we think, what we experience. And we tend to identify ourselves with the dharmas, which is like the mental qualities that we have. For example, compassion, thinking that we are compassionate, or thinking that we are forgiving, for example. We tend to identify ourselves with these qualities, okay? But through this mindfulness practice, then we come to realize that these four things actually changes with time, okay? And they do not have an independent self. Because if they have, then it will stay the same all the time. Your physical form will stay the same all the time. Your mind will stay the same all the time. And if you're compassionate, you will, or for example, if you are stingy, you will be stingy all the time. But that's not true, right? We change, our character, our personality changes with time, right? So when we contemplate on this, then we come to realize that these four things are actually without a basis, okay? And when you come to realize this, then it is some kind of liberation, because it is attachment to these four things that we have suffering. We come to have some kind of dissatisfaction. But when you come to realize that these four things do not have a basis, and we do not have to identify with these four things, then it is actually liberating. And then you wouldn't have so much, you will not be attached to these four items. Okay. Okay, let's read this. One is mindful of phenomena and contemplates how all phenomena arise due to causes and conditions and have no self-nature. In this way, one counteracts the delusion of seeing what has no self as having a self. Okay. Actually, we come to the end of the book. Because, yeah, that's basically the 4 bases of foundation in this book. Okay, so what we can conclude from the mindfulness of phenomena is that everything exists, but like a dream. Okay? Okay, so what is the result of this cultivation? So the result of this cultivation is abandonment from the 4 perverse views. Okay, so what are the 4 perverse views? So the first one is impurity for purity, right? The second one is happiness for suffering for happiness. And then the third one is impermanence for permanence. The fourth one is that which has no independent self for something that does. Okay? So these are the four purpose views. And so when, in Chinese it's called 常乐我净. Okay? So we have these four, we tend to think of the I as having these four qualities. Okay? So the purpose of doing this mindfulness practice is to abandon these four identity. Okay? And then the second is, through this mindfulness practice, we gain entry into the Four Noble Truths. Okay? And detachment from the body, feelings, mind, and phenomena. Okay. So in this text called The Differentiation of the Middle Way and the Extreme, in Chinese it's called 辩中边论颂. You can, and it says in this text, because the mind is karmically produced suffering, because the feelings are the cause of craving, because the mind is the basis for an identity, because the path is the source of non-ignorance, we are led to the Four Noble Truths. So therefore meditate on the establishment of mindfulness. Okay? So what it says here is that when we practice mindfulness, the four foundations of mindfulness, then we are led into understanding the Four Noble Truths. Okay? Let me elaborate from here. So first of all, the body. So through meditating on the establishment of mindfulness on the body, then we come to know that the body is impure. We come to know that this body is actually karmically produced. That is, it is produced from karma. Okay? And this relates to the first noble truth, the truth of suffering. Okay? That means this body is, causes suffering. Right? And then the second one is feelings. When we are mindful of our feelings, then we will understand that the feeling of pleasure is the cause of craving that desires not to be separated from. So when we have a pleasant feeling and we have attachment to this pleasant feeling, it causes suffering, right? And when we have a painful feeling, a unpleasant feeling, and we tend to push it away, that comes from aversion. Okay? So what causes that suffering is our attachment and our aversion, right? Okay? So when we understand this, then this mindfulness of feelings actually relate to the truth of origin, the truth of the cause of suffering. Okay? That what causes this pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral feeling is from the three poisons: our attachment, or our ignorance, or our aversion to this sensation. Okay, and this relates to the second truth. And then the third one is mindfulness of mind, and through analyzing the mind, and the mind is the basis for grasping of an identity, okay, or what we regard to be as the self. And through analyzing the mind to be impermanent, then we will not grasp it as the self. Okay, so when we do that, then we actualize a cessation. Okay, so when you are not attached to the self, you actualize, you would have ceased all kinds of suffering that you experience. Okay, and this relates to the truth of cessation. And then the fourth one is mindfulness of phenomena. So through meditating on the repulsive aspects of the body and on the establishment of mindfulness on phenomenon, we will know that all thoroughly afflicted phenomena are incompatible. Okay, and that all pure phenomena are the antidotes to them. Okay, so when we reflect on the mental qualities that we have, so we can use the practice of giving to overcome our stinginess. We can use our practice of endurance to overcome anger. We can use the practice of diligence to overcome indolence, laziness. Okay, so these are qualities that we can cultivate. We come to realize that these are qualities that we can cultivate, and this relates to the truth of the path. Okay, so when we practice these four foundations of mindfulness, they actually lead us to the Four Noble Truths. All right, and when we say the Four Noble Truths, it doesn't mean that the four truths are noble. It actually means the four truths that noble beings have discovered. And so it's called the Four Noble Truths. All right. Okay, so through the mindfulness practice on these four foundations, then the body relates to the truth of suffering, feelings relate to the truth of the origin, the second truth, mind relates to the truth of cessation, and phenomena relates to the truth of the path. Okay. And then in the Compendium of Knowledge, the reason why these four objects are stated as the observed object is to stop the childish from grasping the body to be the basis of the I. So we tend to regard the body as our I, the self. We tend to regard feelings as the source of enjoyment of this self. We tend to regard the mind, our mind, to be the actual self. And we tend to regard phenomena such as attachment as afflicting, and mental qualities such as confidence, compassion, wisdom, generosity, etc., as purifying the self. Right. Okay. I think I'm running out of time. So can I just skip this and go to the... Okay. So basically what we want to conclude from the four foundations of mindfulness is that while the body, feelings, mind, and phenomena exist, they are not the self. Okay, they are not really the self. Right? Okay, so this is a summary of... Not everybody's holding up their cell phone. Actually, well, yes, so these are the four, this is a summary of what I've just said, and I put it in the chat. Okay, so we have the four objects of mindfulness: body, feelings, mind, and phenomena. So the body is what we regard as the basis of our identity. Okay, and we have the distorted view of being pure, of the body being pure. And so when we are able to overcome this distorted view, then we are able to to realize the truth of suffering. Okay, and then the second one, feelings. We tend to regard the feeling as the source of our enjoyment. We tend to regard feelings to be pleasant, and this relates to the second truth, the truth of origin. Okay, and then the mind, we tend to regard the mind as the actual self, and we tend to think of it as permanent. And when we are able to reflect on the impermanent nature of the mind, then we enter the third truth, that's the truth of cessation. And then the last one, phenomena or mental qualities. We tend to relate these qualities pertaining to the defilement or purification of the self. And we tend to think that these phenomena have independent self. Okay? And when we cultivate qualities that are able to overcome our negative qualities, then that relates to the truth of the path. Okay? Right. Okay, this is actually from the Satipatthana Sutta. And this is a paragraph that keeps repeating in the text. And the reason why you would find repetition in some of the Buddhist texts is because during the Buddha's time, the Buddha gave the teachings orally. And the disciples have to listen very carefully. And so to help them to memorize the teachings, the Buddha would keep repeating these teachings in lines, and they are sometimes very poetic, and they come in certain number of syllables in a line. They have a fixed number of syllables in the line, so it's very poetic, and it aids the disciples in memorizing these teachings. Okay, so in this Satipatthana Sutta, it goes like this. In this way, in regard to the body, feelings, mind, or dharmas, one abides contemplating the body, feelings, mind, or dharmas internally, or one abides contemplating each externally, or one abides contemplating each both internally and externally. One abides contemplating the nature of arising in the body, feelings, mind, and dharmas, the nature of passing away in each, or the nature of both arising and passing away in each. Mindfulness that there is a body, feelings, mind, or dharmas is established in one to the extent necessary for bare knowledge and continuous mindfulness. And one abides independent, not clinging to anything in the world. This is how, in regard to the body, feelings, mind, and dharmas, one abides contemplating each. Okay, and so this breaks up into the essential aspects of the practice. Okay, so contemplating our experience internally, externally, or both. Contemplating the nature of impermanence. Establishing enough mindfulness to recognize what is unfolding moments to moment and without mental commentary. And this is actually essential, the essential part of the practice, without mental commentary. Okay, because you know how our minds can gossip and how our mind like to make comments. Okay, so just experiencing the mindfulness practice as it unfolds moment to moment. That's the essence of the practice. Okay, and abiding without clinging to anything that enters our realm of experience. Okay, so when it's a pleasant feeling, we do not cling on to the pleasant feeling. Okay. And in this sutra, it says this is the only path or the one way forward, which means if you practice this for as short as 7 days, you can gain liberation, or you can gain the fruit of an anagami. Okay, that means in this life you can be liberated. You can try for the next 7 days. And I wish you success. Okay, I think I'm running out of time. But if you'd like to have a copy of this PowerPoint, it's here. Okay, so thank you very much. If there are some slides that I skipped because of the time, so if you want to look back at the slide, you can go onto this website. All right. Okay, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Venerable You Lu, for today's talk, 4 Bases of Mindfulness.